Welcome to BharatLens, India's sharpest eye on world affairs. Welcome to BharatLens, and today we are covering a moment that historians may look back on as the day America's most powerful weapon started to break. For 80 years, the United States has had a tool that no army, no missile, no navy can match for sheer destructive economic power. Sanctions. The ability to cut any country, any company, any individual off from the global financial system, and watch them suffocate economically without firing a single shot. Iran is under sanctions. Russia is under sanctions. North Korea is under sanctions. Venezuela is under sanctions. And every time America put a country under sanctions, the rest of the world complied. Because defying American sanctions meant losing access to American banks, American markets, and the American dollar, which is the currency that runs the entire global economy. Until May 2, 2026. On that day, China's government issued an official order, a legal prohibition order, telling every Chinese company, every Chinese bank, every Chinese individual, do not comply with American sanctions on 5 Chinese oil refineries. We do not recognize these sanctions. We do not accept them. And if you obey America, you are violating Chinese law. For the first time in history, a major world power has legally told its entire economy to ignore American sanctions. And the question every country in the world is now asking, quietly, carefully, is this: if China can do it, what does that mean for everyone else? Let us go through exactly what happened, because the details matter. On April 24, the American Treasury Department placed 5 Chinese oil refineries on its sanctions list. These are what the industry calls teapot refineries, independent, privately owned Chinese oil processors that are generally smaller than state-owned giants. They had been buying Iranian crude oil, heavily discounted oil that Iran sells because of American sanctions blocking it from most buyers. China bought more than 80% of all Iranian oil exported in the entire previous year. These 5 refineries were key parts of that supply chain. The American government called one of them, quote, one of Tehran's most valued customers, saying it had generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for the Iranian military through oil purchases. The sanctions froze their assets and banned anyone from doing business with them. 8 days later, on May 2, China struck back. China's Ministry of Commerce issued what is called a prohibition order under its blocking rules. The order stated in direct, unambiguous language, the sanctions imposed by the United States on these 5 Chinese companies, including their inclusion on the sanctions list, asset freezes, and transaction prohibitions, shall not be recognized, enforced, or observed. The ministry called the American measures an improper restriction on business between Chinese companies and third countries, in violation of international law and the basic norms governing international relations, and then it went further. It said, and I want you to hear this clearly, this order comes into force immediately. Any Chinese company or individual who complies with the American sanctions is now potentially in violation of Chinese law. To understand why this moment is so significant, you need to understand what American sanctions actually are and why they have been so devastatingly effective. America's sanctions system works because of one thing, the US dollar. Approximately 88% of all international trade transactions are settled in US dollars. This means that at some point in almost every major financial transaction in the world, a dollar clearing bank is involved. And almost all dollar clearing runs through the American banking system. When America puts a company or country on its sanctions list, it bans American banks and financial institutions from processing any transactions involving those entities. Since almost all global trade uses dollars, this effectively cuts the sanctioned party off from the entire global financial system. They cannot easily sell their products, receive payments, or conduct business internationally. That is why American sanctions are so powerful. You do not need to be doing business with America directly to be affected. You just need to use dollars, which everyone does. This is also why secondary sanctions are particularly feared. Secondary sanctions threaten to sanction anyone, including companies in third countries, who does business with a sanctioned entity. So a German bank, an Indian shipping company, a Japanese electronics firm, all can face American sanctions if they deal with a sanctioned Iranian oil buyer. This threat is what forces compliance around the world. For 80 years, this system worked almost perfectly. Countries could complain. They could protest. But they complied, because the cost of defying American sanctions was financial exclusion from the global economy. China just said, that calculation has changed. Now let us talk about the weapon China used, because this is something that has been sitting loaded in China's legal arsenal for 5 years, waiting for the right moment. China created its blocking rules in January 2021, almost exactly the day Trump's first term ended and Biden was about to take over. The timing was deliberate. China had watched America use sanctions aggressively against Chinese companies, Iranian entities, Russian firms, and others, and decided to build a legal counterweapon. The blocking rules work like this. When China's government determines that American sanctions are being applied extraterritorially, meaning they are trying to regulate what Chinese companies can do in their own country with third countries that are not America, China can issue a prohibition order declaring those sanctions illegal under Chinese law. Any Chinese company that then complies with those American sanctions is violating Chinese law, and faces fines, penalties, and legal action in Chinese courts. The genius, and the danger, of this system is that it creates a direct legal conflict for any company operating in both America and China. A multinational bank that has operations in both countries now faces an impossible choice. If it complies with American sanctions and refuses to process transactions involving the 5 refineries, it is violating Chinese law. If it complies with Chinese law and processes those transactions, it is violating American sanctions and risks being cut off from the American financial system. China is essentially forcing every global financial institution to choose a side. And here is the crucial detail that makes this moment historic. China had these blocking rules for 5 years. They were ready. The law was written. The mechanism was built. But China never actually used them, never issued a concrete prohibition order, until May 2, 2026. This is the first time. And China chose the exact moment when America was at its most overstretched, fighting a war in Iran, managing a Hormuz crisis, dealing with domestic political violence, running a trade war with half the world, and preparing for a Trump-Xi summit, to pull the trigger. The timing of this move is not accidental. It is a message. And the message has several layers. First, China is protecting its energy security. China bought over 80% of Iranian oil exports last year. The 5 sanctioned refineries are critical infrastructure for China's fuel supply. Allowing America to cut them off would mean allowing America to directly threaten China's energy independence. That is a red line Beijing will never accept. Second, China is testing the limits of American power at its weakest moment. America is currently bogged down in the Iran war, managing a naval blockade of Hormuz, dealing with domestic political instability, and simultaneously running trade disputes with dozens of countries. This is not the moment America can afford a full economic confrontation with China on top of everything else. Third, and most significantly, China is making a statement to the entire developing world. Every country that has ever feared American sanctions, Russia, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, South Africa, Indonesia, is watching this moment. China is showing them that defiance is possible. That the sanctions weapon has limits. That if you are large enough, determined enough, and have built enough alternative financial infrastructure, you can say no. This is not just about 5 oil refineries. This is China drawing a new line in the global financial order. Here's where this story gets deeply complicated for the global economy, and for India. Any company with operations in both the United States and China is now in legal jeopardy. A European bank that processes a transaction involving one of the 5 sanctioned refineries, because Chinese law requires it to, now risks American sanctions. A Japanese shipping company, a Singaporean trading house, an Indian financial institution, all face this impossible position. Analysts are already describing this as a significant step toward competing legal frameworks for global trade, and a major acceleration of the path toward economic decoupling between America and China. The global financial system, built on the assumption that American rules apply everywhere, is facing its most direct challenge since it was constructed after World War II. For India specifically, this matters in ways that go beyond the immediate crisis. India has been walking a careful line between America and China for years. India uses American financial systems and the dollar for most of its global trade. But India also has deep economic ties with China, buys Russian oil under similar secondary sanctions pressure, and has its own interest in a world where the dollar's dominance is not absolute. If China's blocking order holds, if American banks and financial institutions do not immediately retaliate in ways that force Beijing to back down, it sets a precedent. And that precedent is one India will be watching extremely carefully. Here's the full picture. For 80 years, America's sanctions have been the most powerful non-military weapon in the world. No country, no company, no economy could afford to ignore them, because ignoring them meant financial exclusion from the dollar-denominated global economy. On May 2, 2026, China said, "That era is over." For us, China's blocking rules have been activated for the first time. 5 Chinese refineries are now legally protected from American sanctions under Chinese law. Every global financial institution is being forced to choose between 2 competing legal systems. And the world's second-largest economy has just demonstrated that it has both the will and the legal architecture to challenge America's financial supremacy directly. Will it work? That depends entirely on what America does next. If Washington retaliates hard, sanctioning major Chinese banks, escalating the financial confrontation, the global economy faces a rupture nobody is prepared for. If Washington blinks, backs down, negotiates, finds a face-saving compromise, it signals that sanctions have limits that the whole world will soon begin to test. Either way, something has changed. The question India and every other country must now ask is simple and urgent. In the world that comes after this moment, whose rules do you want to live under? Because very soon, the option of living under both may no longer be available. Comment below. Do you think America's sanctions are losing their power? And what should India do as this battle between Washington and Beijing intensifies? I want to hear your thinking.